the definitive AP class tier list for underclassmen AP classes. So like I said, this is going to be specifically geared towards classes that are typically taken by 9th and 10th graders. Now I know things are a little bit different from school to school or even teacher to teacher, so I'm going to try to keep this as objective as possible and not take into account things like teachers or how easy it is or hard it is specifically at the school I went to. And I'm really just going to focus on the content of the actual class itself. So the S tier is going to be the maximum difficulty, and the F tier is going to be the minimum difficulty categories, and it's going to go from there. So let's go ahead and get started. So starting with AP Human Geography, I took this class as a freshman. So it was the first class I took, first AP class I took. And, putting that aside, I think this was a very easy class, actually. This is a solid like E, or I'll actually say D tier, just simply because it's one of the intro classes across the nation for AP classes for a reason, and that it's the content is not hard. This isn't something that's super STEM or advanced content based, but rather it's just there's some memorization, there's some application, and beyond that it's pretty simple. Now AP Psych, I'm also going to go ahead and put in the D category. Again, it's also known to be one of those intro kind of AP classes that a lot of 9th graders take, and I think it's simply for that reason, is that it's pretty easy. It's very memorization heavy, and I think where AP classes start to get difficult is truly just the application portion, and this kind of lacks that, and I think that's why this tends to be such an easy class, and a class that a lot of 9th graders tend to take. Now, next up, AP Computer Science Principles. This is the last AP class I took as a freshman, and this was definitely in the E tier. I mean, I don't think AP classes can get much easier than this class. I mean, especially if you're comparing this relatively to like Computer Science A, for example, this course is super, super easy. Computer science can typically be very daunting for a lot of students, but CSP, as it's known, AP Computer Science Principles is known as CSP, is it's a lot easier to grasp, and it's not really focused on the hard coding and stuff like that, but it's just the fundamental concepts surrounded by computing, and it's not so in depth. It has 5 big ideas, and there's literally not much content in the course. It's a pretty easy exam to survive and even just get a 5 on it. But the only downside to that is that it doesn't really give you that much college credit at most colleges. Now, for my sophomore year classes, AP Spanish Language and Culture, these things started to kind of get a little bit more difficult, and I go ahead and put this in the C tier. Now, obviously, this is not taking into account if you're native. Like, obviously, if you're native, I'm sure this is a little bit easier if you already know the language. But I came in taking this class. I already had 3 years of Spanish under my belt, but it was kind of mid overall. I mean, everyone kind of comes in there, and because there's so many years behind it, where you've learned your Spanish through different paths. Like, people come there as a native, people come in there with 1 year of Spanish, people come there with 3 years of Spanish. Everyone kind of has their own thing that they struggle with, and because there's speaking, there's reading, there's writing, there's audio listening, there's all these different things, you're always going to have something that you're going to need to work on in this class, and so for that reason it's in the mid category. Now AP Physics 1, I'm sure most of you guys are aware of it, definitely kicks it up a notch, and I'm going to go ahead and put it in the I'm gonna say B category, just because the Physics 2 and Physics C tend to be a little bit tougher, so I'm gonna save those for later. But overall, pretty difficult class. I mean, it's content heavy. There's a lot of units, it's a lot of content, and the content is difficult, quite frankly. You've got to know your stuff. If you haven't mastered your algebra concepts as well as some of the pre-calc concepts, you're really going to be in for a ride for this class. And so really you have to make sure that you have the strongest foundation possible for this class, and that's where you're going to survive. Now, AP Seminar, I'm going to go ahead and put in the C category. I mean, this is going to be definitely dependent on the teacher, because the teacher actually assigns you about like 20-25% of your AP score due to the presentations, but overall pretty mid class. I mean, it's really not much work. I mean, you're just writing a paper, but you get so much time for it, even though it's like a 2,000 word paper and also a 1,200 word paper and then 2 presentations and preparing for the AP test. You have an entire year to work on this, and it's really not that bad. As long as you're in class doing your work, it's a pretty chill class. And AP World History, I'm going to go ahead and put this in the B category. It's definitely a pretty marginal step, a pretty big step up from HGAP. WHAP is just so much more content. I mean, it's literally thousands of years of world history, or about 1,000 years of world history, condensed into like 8 months, hopefully, if you're lucky. And, it's just so much content that by the time you get to the AP test, it's like, how do I even remember this? Not to mention the application portion is also a little bit difficult. Now, AP Environmental Science, or APES, is definitely going in the E category. I was debating on putting in the D category, but it is a little bit easier than HGAP and Psych, and it's pretty easy simply because it's compared to especially the other sciences, it's not very STEM heavy. It's just, you know, straight rote memorization and then take that knowledge, apply it on the test. There's nothing crazy about it. It's super straightforward and simple. Now, AP Computer Science A, I personally struggled a lot in this class. I'm gonna put this in the B category, even though I found CSP to be really easy. I feel like a lot of people tend to either understand the coding aspect or don't. Like, people's brains are kind of just wired to do so or not, and it's a little bit hard to improve on that class, but overall it's going to be in the B tier. Now, AP Stats, I'm going to go ahead and put in the C tier. It's definitely a lot easier than a lot of the calc classes and stuff, so it's definitely going to be the C tier, and that's pretty much it to it. Now, AP Calculus AB is definitely a pretty big step up from stats, and I'm going to go ahead and put it in the A category. I know a lot of people would put this in the B category, but I'm going to put it in the A category just because that tends to be skewed, because people only take calculus when they know they're going to be good at it, right? Otherwise they would have taken stats, or now they probably would have taken AP pre-calculus, or they'd be taking regular pre-calculus, right? And so I think a lot of people tend to skew these results, but honestly, it's a difficult class. I mean, you know, if you look at the data for like college students, a lot of people drop out of this class. A lot of people drop out even at the high school level if they're taking the AP version, and so I'm definitely going to put that in the A tier. Now, Calc BC. Probably the most difficult course I've taken thus far in my underclassmen, you know, era. It's definitely going to go in the S tier. It's just difficult to wrap your brain around. I mean, it's basically the same thing as AB with additional concepts, so it's just taking it a step further, and to cover that much content in a year, especially if you haven't taken AB, is going to be difficult. And what I'd recommend is that you really just have a solid foundation of your previous math concepts in order to survive the class. Now, AP US History, I'm also going to put in the B category, just simply because it's the same exact format as WHAP. You know, some people say it's harder, you know, the pass rate's a little bit lower, 5 rate's a little bit lower, but overall, like, it's pretty much the same as world history, just, you know, different material, and I think that's pretty universally agreed on. Now, AP English Lang, this is definitely going to vary by person, but I'm going to put this in the B category. I mean, I think a lot of people definitely just tend to struggle with the subjectivity of the writing component of AP Lang. You know, you're not as dependent on these MCQs to basically be able to point out your errors and improve, you know, in a very objective way. And you've really just got to spend time to just hone in on your writing skills and improve the way you articulate your arguments and things like that. And it's just a very subjective class. Now, the next couple of classes I didn't personally take, but I know they're very common classes that underclassmen do take. Not very common, but, you know, some schools offer, some schools don't, you know. So this data is going to be basically on what my friends say, some things that, some polls that I've given out, and based on some of those data. So AP Music Theory, from what I've heard, it's a very difficult class, and it's in the B category, maybe even the A category, depending on how quick you are at learning. But it's just very difficult from what I've heard. There's a lot of components to music, and another thing is that there's not many resources online. Like, you can be studying calculus and there will be like videos online, there'll be Khan Academy, like all these different resources, but with music theory, that's not really the case. There's really just the Barron's book, and there's not really that many resources available, so that's what makes this class so difficult. Now, AP Bio, I know it's a very common class for sophomores, even freshmen to take, and from what I've heard, that's in the C category. It's not too difficult, but it's overall mid. You know, there's some content, you know, there's some application, but it's not as STEM heavy, not as, you know, mathematically heavy as calculus, calculus BC, physics C, physics 2, etc. And so overall, it's kind of in that category. European history, from what I've heard, is also in the B category. Again, it's in the same format as WHAP and APUSH. So if you've gotten those concepts down from those courses, you know, AP Euro, you're kind of in that, you know, kind of just breezing through it as far as that, and I'd even put in the C category if you're in that, you know, that kind of case. Now, the last two classes that we're going to look at today, AP Physics 2, I'm going to go ahead and put AP Physics 2 in the B category. I know it's going to shock some people because you would assume that the 2 class would be harder than the 1 class for physics. But overall, from what I've heard, it's just a continuation of the concepts. I mean, at one point, I believe that these 2 classes were together, and it's not too terrible. In fact, I think the Physics 2 concepts for some people tend to be harder than the Physics 1 concepts, and vice versa, so that's why it's kind of even. So overall, it's right there. Now, the final class we're going to rank is AP Chinese Lang. Now, AP Chinese Lang is typically, from what I've seen, taken by a lot of natives, because otherwise most people tend to take Spanish or French. But from what I've heard, it's pretty just similar to the Spanish Lang class. You know, you either know it or don't. But I will say it is a little bit tougher than Spanish, because Chinese just is traditionally a more difficult language to pick up, especially if you've only been speaking English at home, because there's, English and Spanish do have kind of their similarities. They have cognates and things like that, but Chinese and English don't really have those kind of similarities, and so you're just gonna have to put a little bit more effort, but overall that's kind of where it is. So, And with that, we're gonna go ahead and conclude this, video. Sorry, we're gonna redo that part. And with that, we're gonna go ahead and conclude this video. I appreciate y'all sticking around to the end. So that was the Underclassmen AP classes tier list ranking. Hopefully y'all will tune in about a year or two when I finish taking the majority of the rest of the classes and we can do a full on ranking. Comment below if you want any other video ideas specifically, and I'll see you in the next one.